Good morning, Standard 5. Today, the lesson that we are going to deal with is lesson number 7, found on page number 84. The name of the lesson is Vertical Descent. Now, this lesson was written by Jules Gabriel Verne. He is a French novelist. Now, this novelist has written a lot of adventure books or novels, and some of the books that he has written are Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Around the World in 80 Days. If you get a chance, or if you are a very good reader or a voracious reader, make sure that you read these books. They are really lovely. Now, vertical descent, when you say vertical descent, the word vertical is either you go straight up or you go straight down below. Now, here when you say vertical descent, descent is where you get down. So, vertical descent is where you go straight down. And this is what is going to happen in this adventure. There are three people who are involved in this adventure. And one is Professor Lidenbrock, who is a famous geologist, and his nephew Axel, and the guide Hans. Now, Professor Lidenbrock is a geologist. When you say a famous geologist, he is a scientist who knows about the earth, who studies about the earth, about the structure of the earth, how the earth was formed, about the materials found under the earth. So he is a geologist. When you say nephew, Nephew is nephew. Nephew is your sister's son or your brother's son. It's called a nephew. Now the professor's nephew is Axel. Then you have a guide. His name is Hans. When you say a guide, a person who shows the way to others and a person who knows that area very well. Now these three people are going to visit a volcano. And that volcano has 3 craters. A crater is the mouth of a volcano. When a volcano occurs, it makes a big hole in the mountain. So this is called a crater. Now this volcano that they are going to visit is in Iceland. Iceland is in the northern part of the world, which is filled with ice. So these 3 people are going to study about the crater. Let me begin by reading. Professor Lidenbrock, a famous geologist, wanted to travel to the center of the earth. Now, this geologist wanted to go to the middle part of the earth. So, he took his nephew Axel to a volcano with 3 craters in Iceland. So, he took his nephew's name is Axel. He takes them to Iceland, and there they go to a volcano, to the mouth of a volcano in Iceland. When they arrived at the volcano with their guide, Hans, they realized that they must journey inside the crater in the middle to reach the center of the earth. Now they are saying they reached the volcano in Iceland, they reached the crater. And then this geologist said that he began to realize that if I want to see the center of the earth, I have to go inside the crater. The crater is like a chimney. So he says, I have to go to the center if I want to reach the center of the earth, I have to enter that part from where the volcano erupted. I have to go to that part. So they decide to go to that inside part of the volcano. Now began our journey, real journey. So far I hadn't looked into the pit which we would have entered, but now the supreme awe had arrived. The Axel is telling us this story. Axel is telling us that the real part of our adventure began. He looked into that pit. They reached the crater, the volcano, and he looked inside that pit, and they said that, he says, now actually the real adventure began. There was a rock by the mouth of the crater's chimney. I bent over it and gazed into the bottomless pit. So this nephew, he's telling that just beside the crater, here there was one big stone, and from above the stone, he peeped into this hole of the volcano, and he said he could not find the bottom of the pit. That means it was very, very deep. A bottomless pit is he could not find the end of the pit. You couldn't find the end of the pit. He gazed is to look at. I could see steps along the straight walls of the chimney, but there were no rails. However, we climbed down the chimney. I asked my uncle, if we miss one step, we will fall into the pit and break our necks. My hair stood on end with terror. So, Axel was actually worried. He did not know what's going to happen. He peeped into the pit, into that ditch, but he could not find the end of it. Then he looked into it and he found inside the hole there were small steps. But then he said there were no rails. No rails, when he says there was nothing to hold on to. When you're climbing down steps, you want something to catch and climb down to the bottom. But then there was nothing at the side to hold on to. So he told his uncle, if ever we slip the step, I think we'll fall into that ditch and we'll break our neck. Thinking of all these things, slipping from the steps without any rails, falling into the pit which has no bottom, and breaking their necks, all this made him so frightened. When he says, my hair stood on end with terror. My hair stood on end with terror means he was totally frightened. Have you seen a cat when it's frightened? Its hair stands up. The same thing, he says, my hair stood on end with terror. That means his hair stood up, and it was an expression to show that he was frightened or afraid. We will not take the stairs, my uncle quietly answered. So the uncle said, no, do not. We won't go. We won't climb the steps down the pit. I began to grow hopeful. Surely my uncle had realized that this journey was dangerous and impossible. We would soon be returning home. Axel, what he did was, I began to grow hopeful. So Axel thought, oh, now my uncle will not go on this adventure. He tried to be optimistic. He said, my uncle will cancel this adventure. He was quite happy because he thought this trip is going to be very dangerous and something we cannot do. So he thought that he and his uncle would return back home. But my uncle had other plans. He uncoiled a thick 400 feet long rope and dropped half of it on the ground. Then he tied it to the rock and threw the other half into the pit. He wanted us to jump holding the rope. But Axel thought that they would return home without doing the adventure. But his uncle was very, very determined to go on this adventure. The first thing his uncle did was he had a mountain rope. So a rope, he took out that rope, and that rope was around 400 feet long. He uncoiled this, he opened the rope, and then he threw half of the rope into the pit, and then one side he tied it around that big rock outside the pit. And then he told Axel and the guide, we have to climb with the help of the rope. We have to jump with the help of the rope. But how will we untie it once we reach the bottom? I asked, confused. So Axel said, Uncle, we will get down the pit. But then how will we take out the rope that is tied to the rock? So Axel was totally confused. We will jump down holding both the halves of the rope. After we descend 200 feet, we will leave one end of it that will raise rapidly and push us further down, he explained. We will continue this till we reach the bottom of the hole. So they decided, Uncle told him, we'll take 2 ropes and we'll get down. And then when we get halfway down, around 200 feet, what we'll do is we'll leave one and then we'll just hold on to the rope. The rope will slip down, slowly will slip down, and then we'll reach the bottom of the pit, he says. My heart sank. My heart sank it means that he was totally upset, disappointed, because he was very sad. When we say my heart sank, it means that the heart felt a kind of weakness. So he said, my heart sank. What about the load? Hans asked. Then the guide asked this uncle Lidenbrock. He said, "We have brought so much of food and clothes and carried so many of our things with us. What happens to those goods?" He says. That is loads. The loads is the things that they carried with them. "I will divide our load into three parts. Each of us will strap a part of our food provisions upon his back." So he said, "I'll divide the food into three parts, and three of us will carry our food on our back." "What about our clothes, the ladder, and ropes?" I asked. So Axel said, what will we do with the clothes that we bought, the ladders that we bought, the ropes that we bought, how to take them inside? They will go down by themselves. So this professor said, they'll go by themselves. When he says they will go down by themselves, he means to say, I will throw it, they will go and fall down in the pit. My uncle always had the simplest solution for all problems. He tied the clothes and ladders firmly in one bundle and sent it thudding down the chimney, leaning over the edge of the chimney till he lost sight of it. Axel is saying his uncle was so used to solve all difficult problems in a very easy way, he said. What that uncle did was he took the clothes, the ladder, and all the things that they brought along with them and just tied it into a tight bundle and threw it into the pit. The that bundle went and fell with a thudding sound. Thudding sound. It made a kind of sound when it fell down and reached the chimney's end, leaning over the edge of the chimney till he lost sight of it. So actually, this uncle peeped down below. As it was falling down, you couldn't see when it reached down. Once he could not see where it went. He just came back, but then they heard it falling in the end with a sound. Then he straightened up and turned around. "It's our turn now," he said. When the bundle fell down, he couldn't. When it went down and he couldn't see it anymore, he turned back to the guide and to his nephew and said, "Now we have to go down the pit." Numb with fear, I jumped, clutching the double cord with one hand. In the other, I was holding a stick to get support from the wall. What if the rock from which I was hanging gave way? Naxel had so many thoughts in his mind. He became numb with fear. When you say numb with fear, he said he could not get any feeling at all. So he said he was so much afraid. He actually must have turned cold. Moreover, they were in Iceland. Everything became numb. He immediately caught hold to the rope, both the sides of the rope, and then he took even a stick along with him. You can see the picture where he's holding a stick along with him. In one hand he caught the rope, on the other hand he caught a stick, and then he climbed down. And then as he was climbing down, he was thinking, one side of the rope is tied to the rock there. Suppose the rock comes falling behind them, or the rock is not able to withstand their weight. What will happen to us? He's just imagining many things. The other, however, were calm. Whenever one of the slippery steps shook under Hans' feet, he quietly said, "Gifacht." Could mean, "Look out, come here, leave now." So he said, immediately as they were crossing, when he looked at his uncle and the guide, they both looked very calm. They didn't look frightened the way Axel was. And every time the guide slipped a little bit, he used to say a word. Maybe it was a French word. He said, "Gifacht." So he said, maybe take care or look out, careful, or something he must have meant. "Attentions," repeated my uncle. Immediately, as soon as the guide was giving a call like "Gifacht," immediately you will find uncle also kept on saying, "Take care, careful, pay attention while getting down." After half an hour, we were standing upon a rock that lay across the chimney. From one side to the other, I carefully looked over the edge of the narrow standing ground and observed that the bottom of the chimney was still invisible. After climbing down for about half an hour, that is 30 minutes, they stood for some time and looked up at the hole. It looked like a chimney. You know what's a chimney? A chimney is from where smoke comes out. It looked just like that. A chimney. And then they said, slowly they looked down. And when they looked down, they said they could not see anything below. It was invisible. They said nothing could be seen. They could not see. When you see the end of the thing, then you'll feel, we are going to reach somewhere. But they could not even see the end or the bottom of the pit. So we descended another 200 feet in half an hour. Another 200 miles, another 200 feet they climbed in another 30 minutes. I was growing hopeless. So Axel was feeling like this is useless. We will not go to the end of this pit. There is no end, he felt. My uncle, however, was enthusiastically observing everything around. On one of our stops, he turned to me and said, "These rocks used to lie underwater." I ignored him, and so we went on. So uncle was telling his nephew, "See, these rocks, no, before it was covered with water," he says. But Axel had so many other thoughts in mind, he did not listen to what his uncle said. He did not pay attention to what the uncle said. 3 more hours passed. I still could not see the bottom of the chimney. But when I raised my head, I could see that the walls of the chimney were drawing closer to each other. It was beginning to grow darker. So he said, 3 hours they're walking down. They're getting down to the chimney, the bottom of the pit. Suddenly Axel looked up. When Axel looked up, he says, I could see the walls of the chimney were drawing close to each other. Were drawing close to each other means the hole from which they entered was becoming smaller. Becoming smaller because the distance had increased. So far away from the hole they came that the hole looked so small, and then he could see that it was becoming dark. It was becoming night. Just then I heard my uncle cry, "We have reached." "Where?" I asked. Suddenly, as he looked up and it was becoming dark, he realized his uncle said, "Oh, now we have reached." As soon as they said, "Where we have reached," Axel said, "Where? What have we reached? Where have we reached?" "At the bottom of the perpendicular chimney," he answered. "There's a passage leading to the right. We will go there tomorrow. Let us have our supper now and go to sleep." At last, where have we reached? When Axel asked, the uncle said, "We have reached down below. We have reached the bottom of the pit." And then he said, "There's one more route that is going to the right. We will not continue our journey. Tomorrow we will go to the right side of that volcano crater." And then they decided, now we will lay down. We are tired, so we'll just have some supper. Supper is dinner or food for the night. We'll have some supper and then we'll go to sleep. I sighed with relief. There was still some light here. After they reached the pit below and they decided to stop their journey, immediately Axel was so happy. He was really happy that they reached the end of the pit, and then that there was still light in that area where they had got down to. We opened our basket and ate a little. Then we went to sleep upon a bed of stones and rocks. When I opened my eyes, I could see the Ursa Minor shining in the sky. It was a bright, sparkling point of light at the extreme end of the gigantic 3,000 feet long chimney. Now a vast telescope comforted, at last I fell fast asleep. So at last what happened was, they reached the bottom of the pit, they opened their basket, they ate a little, and then they went to sleep on the stones that were down below the pit. And after some time, he opened his eyes and then he could see the sky. And what he could see in the sky was Ursa Minor. Ursa Minor is a group of stars. They are also called as the Big Bear. So these stars you could find in the shape of a bear, and there you even have the pole star is there. The pole star is a star that guides the ships on their journey. So you have this pole star. It is also a part of this group of stars. It is called as the Ursa Minor. He could see that it was shining in the night, and then they said this chimney through which they came was around 3,000 feet long chimney. It looked like a telescope. It looked like a telescope through which they could see the sky. And at last he felt so nice that he went to sleep. This is the end of the lesson.